Welcome to the SEI Podcast Series, a production of the Carnegie Mellon University Software Engineering Institute. The SEI is a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. A transcript of today's podcast is posted on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts.
Hello, I'm Suzanne Miller. I'm a principal researcher here at the Software Engineering Institute Software Solution Division. And I'm here with my friend and colleague, Linda Parker Gates. And today we are going to be talking about Agile strategic planning. Not three words you don't always see put together, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Linda's been writing about this. She and I have been talking about it. And so we're going to have a conversation today. Welcome, Linda.
Thank you, Susie.
So before we get into things, we usually ask people a little bit about why are you here? What is it that brings you into the SEI and sort of this topic? What is it about this topic that draws you in? So why don't you go ahead and start with that?
Sure. So I lead the Software Acquisition Pathways Initiative in SSD, and my team is working to inform and articulate acquisition modernization. And we have our hands in other kinds of software engineering problems as well. But my personal focus is on planning and strategy, and some of the socio-technical kinds of things that surround software. So that includes things like performance excellence, technology transition, change management, things like that, things I know you know a lot about as well, Susie. And so I've been on the Board of Examiners for the Baldrige National Quality Award 5 times, and I'm currently the co-lead for the Association for Strategic Planning's Government Community of Practice. But I first wrote about Agile strategy back in 2012. And in the decade that has, that lies between.
Almost a decade, yeah.
It's hard to believe. Yeah. Agility is really pervasive now, and not just in software, but in business. The concepts are being applied well beyond software, and obviously they've taken root in software. So, agility is not only the present, but the future of software and business. And the reason for that is because we're in this fast-paced, very complex world, and the Agile principles really serve quite well in that kind of an environment.
And what I bring to this is some of the same background as Linda. We've worked on and off for over 20 years together. Transition management, organizational change, strategic planning. We went to some of the same classes together in strategic planning. But I also am one of the leads in our Agile practice in the SEI, Agile and government practice, Agile transformation. And so I come at it from the viewpoint of bringing Agile into the enterprise through lots of different channels. And one of them is strategic planning fits into that, because anytime we can get people to think with an Agile mindset for Agile for X, it's a win in my boat, because it gets their mindset shifted to iterative, incremental, collaborative. If you go back to the Agile manifesto, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Those are all things that if we adopt those, they really inform how we do strategic planning and other kinds of planning, not just how we do software. And I think that's kind of the magic of the manifesto in that respect. And we actually have a slide in our training now that says Agile is everywhere. And I have like book covers from, Agile human resources and Agile marketing. And so the fact that this has come into the strategic planning realm is a natural follow-on in my mind. I think you see that too. And so, so that's why we want to talk about this today. So, Linda, you've written a lot about strategic planning, and I want our viewers to know we will include links to those blogs in our transcript. But why do you pair it with Agile? I talked a little bit about sort of how I see it being an evolution, but what are some of the things that you would say are related to the origin of Agile and strategic planning getting merged together?
That's an interesting question, because I have a 3-part blog series, and it starts really kind of suggesting the use of Agile practices outside of software. I think we're well beyond that now. And then it lays out, the second article lays out some steps for Agile strategic planning, and the third one really focuses on execution, and I'll talk more about why that's so important. But strategic planning's typically been this kind of first of all, what it is just an organization's approach for how it's going to achieve its mission, right? In its simplest form, that's what a strategy is. But it's typically been this kind of top-down, roughly annual exercise that leads, maybe mistakenly leads an organization to think that they are planning what they're going to be doing for the next 5 years or 10 years or something. And that's not really practical anymore. And so that decomposition mindset where you lay out, a high level goal or a mission or vision, and you decompose and then you execute and then you hope you get somewhere in some number of years is not practical anymore for some of the reasons we've already talked about. And so that decomposition mindset is not really helping us work in a world where we have to embrace the big picture and the details at the same time. It kind of calls for a different kind of thinking. And strategic plans have failed for some reasons that we now know how to move past, right? They haven't been well aligned with action plans. They haven't been executed to produce measurable results. There haven't been, the kind of feedback loops that you need in order to make changes and effectively assign resources, things like that. So, again, agility and agile concepts bring things like flexibility and speed and collaboration to the table, which are big pluses for strategists.
And I think that from coming from the sort of agile implementation viewpoint, bringing agile into strategic planning gives the people that are doing agile down in the trenches, as it were, that it gives them more of a voice. And they already know, if you're working in an organization that has agile software developers, agile engineers, when you say we're going to do strategic planning a la agile, then they actually know what that means. They understand that it means that we're going to iterate, and that we're going to be allowed to iterate, and that we're going to deliver things incrementally, and that we're going to collaborate. It's not just going to be this top-down flow, from the very top of the hill. And those things allow them to be more active. And I think that serves most of our enterprises, when the people that are doing the work can be more active in having a voice in what's the vision for the work and what's the plan for the work. So there's a top-down aspect of it, and there's a bottom-up aspect of it that I think both contribute to agile strategic planning being something that can be useful to organizations, especially ones that are already of the mindset that they either are or going to adopt agile.
Right.
So let's get a little deeper. So you talked about both planning and execution, and why don't we just talk about what are the steps that are involved in agile strategic planning, and how does it look different from what traditional strategic planning? That's one of the things I think our viewers are going to want to ask is, well, how does this look different? So let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah. And what's kind of funny is when you start down this road of agile strategic planning, it doesn't look very different at first, right? Because you still have to kind of take stock and understand your context and know what your broader environment looks like, your competitive scans and things like that. You still have to have some kind of vision, a rallying point, something that people can get around. You can't just be churning and doing, small short cycle things. You've got to kind of know where you're trying to go in the bigger picture. And you've got to build a roadmap, right? So that involves, doing some selecting of a subset of goals or picking some things that you want to work on that you think are going to advance your position. Where it starts to get different is when you get into this idea of continual execution of your strategic plan and these short cycle loops. And I want to talk about what I mean by short cycle strategic planning. What you're really doing is shrinking the time between the divergent exploratory kind of thinking that you do and the convergent, actionable doing. Right. So the thinking and the doing, and there's always a healthy tension between those things if you are doing things effectively, but you're really shrinking that cycle down so that you're being creative and then you're kind of coming together and making progress in very short cycles. So the continual execution piece is pretty important. And it is characterized by, launching and executing action plans really frequently. And this is really important, measuring what you're doing and looking at the data that you're generating. I think the other really important piece is having a governance rhythm that keeps all of this at the forefront, so that leadership and operational units are looking at progress against the big picture regularly. And by that I mean monthly at least, or something like that. And what all that does is allows you to make adjustments.
Right.
So you're not just kind of following a path and hoping that at the end of some number of years you land where you want to. Meanwhile, the world is changing all around you. Instead, you're able to make adjustments along the way.
And so that brings me to the Agile balance with this. The short cycles in Agile are learning cycles. And I didn't hear you say that explicitly, but that was implied by what you were saying, is that we are using these shorter cycles to learn so that we can adjust the big picture. I mean, can you imagine if I had done my strategic planning for any organization in February of 2020 and I wasn't going to do it again until February of 2021? Holy cow, talk about a world change.
I remember when we had 2020 strategic plans in 2010, and I
don't think we predicted that, did we?
No.
So, that idea that we're allowed to and encouraged to continue that environmental scanning, which we do intensely, kind of on a once a year basis. But in my experience, most organizations let go of that after, we're going to do our environmental scan again in a year. And, that environmental scanning is one of the things that gives you that pivot learning. Wait a minute, we have a pandemic. We're not going to be able to do things exactly the way we plan. Or wait a minute, we've got cybersecurity threats of a different nature. And that kind of ability, that kind of mindset is a very natural mindset within the Agile framework that brings in. One of the things you talked about in your November 2020 blog was bringing in the idea, and I sort of alluded to it a little bit earlier, of role-based involvement across the enterprise. And so why don't you talk a little bit about sort of how that plays explicitly into the Agile strategic planning?
Sure. Yeah. And you did tee that up really well. Thank you. And, you also mentioned, the Agile preference for individuals and interactions, right, over large processes and things like that. So with a role-based enterprise-wide capability, what that means is that everybody, according to their role in the organization, is involved in setting strategy and executing strategy. And so, for example, leadership, right, rather than directing strategy, is really framing goals, then getting inputs from across the organization, and then linking organizational assets to the opportunities are uncovered by the people who understand the work and who are doing the work. And so it makes strategy and decision making, no longer a black box activity. It's accessible to everybody. Leaders, set these visionary targets, but then employees are empowered to find, innovative ways to solve problems and contribute to the vision that everybody understands. And you can also bring customers in more frequently. So voice of the customer is kind of a tenet of strategic planning, but it tends to be occasional and, suffer some of the problems we've already talked about. So if you have execution as part of your operational rhythms, you can bring your customers into the conversation too, to let them help you, set strategy, learn with you, and monitor for changes in course that might be necessary.
And that's another tenet of when you talk about the Agile Manifesto, customer collaboration is a big thing. And so that idea of enlarging the scope of stakeholders to include the customer is one of the ways you improve collaboration with them when we're doing Agile things with the customer, developing their products and whatnot, as well as allowing them to inform some of our strategic planning going along. You mentioned also, and measurement is one of the things that that everybody kind of cringes at, is, I'm being measured against my goals. And one of the things that we found in Agile implementations for product development is that those short cycle times really mean you have lots more opportunities for measurement, but the measurements are more granular, and they're not the, oh my gosh, you missed it by 50%. It's now more like, well, we're 10% out of bed with where we thought we were going to be. Do we need to correct or not? and we actually can use data for decision making. And so I want to sort of compare how does Agile strategic planning use organizational data in an Agile way.
Right. So, I mean, the short cycle planning and execution that I'm talking about is in its essence about responding to change. And those responses need to be data driven. So, without getting into things like future scenarios, which you and I have worked with quite a bit, you need to find ways to figure out which direction things are going, right? As you execute your plan, are you making progress, and how is the world changing?
Right.
So that you understand if your progress is still relevant or desired. So in order to monitor progress and understand how to make decisions, you need reliable data. The thing that's cool about data is it can be scary, but it also can be kind of relieving, right? Because it can help you take the emotion out of decision making, and then if you've got transparent criteria for understanding your plans and evaluating them and understanding if you're making progress, then data becomes a way to help you make decisions, and course correction is sort of a non-threatening tool that you have in order to work more effectively. So measurement can be your friend, but it is hard. I'll give you that.
And I also want to highlight a term that you use there, which is transparent criteria. I think one of the things that makes measurement scary especially in terms of goal performance, is if there isn't a transparent set of criteria, ideally one that the person or organization being measured actually agrees to, then you feel like you're not, I'm being measured against something that I don't understand. And so that's another aspect of Agile, is the measurement as a transparent action, not as a black box action, that bringing that into strategic planning. I think a lot of organizations I've worked with in the past would have benefited just from that alone, of having more transparent criteria that we know we're being measured against. So that's another connection. So in the 2020 post, you also wrote about mapping strategy to action and results, which is one of the things we're talking about, is one of the toughest problems in strategic planning, and I definitely agree with that. But what are some of the challenges related to that, and what are some of the other challenges you've seen organizations face, and how does Agile strategic planning? We've gotten into a little bit, but what are some things we haven't talked about that Agile strategic planning would help, that are typical issues in traditional strategic planning?
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, and we've already talked about why execution is so hard. But the rate of change in the world today is just it's a huge challenge, and it almost feels like we're nearing this state of constant revolution.
Yeah.
So I would still put my money on Agile practices as the best way to handle
Sure.
these rapid rates of change. But one of the things I'm noticing is that we're starting to see this massive need for collaboration. It's really almost it's becoming naive to think that an organization can set a vision and achieve it on their own. And so I think one of the problems for strategists that's on the horizon is going to be the idea of the organization itself, right? It might not make sense to build
the boundary of organization.
Exactly. I think that boundary is not nearly as rigid as it used to be. And so it might not make sense to assume that firm boundary around organizational strategy and be able to approach strategy problems that way. We might need to think about interorganizational strategies. And I will tell you, I don't have the answers to that yet. I think that's a really new problem that we're going to have to put our minds to. But like I said, I think agility is still going to be part of the solutions. And that's because of the rate of change. But, as collaboration really takes off, I think it's going to challenge the notion of the organization itself, and we're going to have to rethink the way we strategize with our partners and our suppliers and everybody.
So interesting, because as I'm listening, I'm reflecting on the fact that right now I'm involved in two different collaborative activities that are multi-program, multi-organization, that are trying to set visions for a particular topic. It's exactly what you're talking about. They've got to manage the expectations across multiple organizations, and really they're dealing with an entire ecosystem, not with just one element of the ecosystem now. So all that system of systems work we did in 2000s is probably going to come back. what is it? What is old is new again.
Right.
So we'll have to see how system. Now there you go. There's the next blog post: is system of systems and strategic planning. That's really what you're saying, and um, that's a challenge. The other challenge I think that I'm seeing in strategic planning and bringing it into organizations that are in transition from a mindset viewpoint. So I work with a lot of organizations that are coming out of traditional acquisition. They're large programs, have been around a while. They are trying to move to this ongoing delivery of capability mindset. And as they do that, they still have mindsets for strategic planning, for systems engineering, for production, for sustainment that are not iterative and incremental, that are big batch, nothing is done until everything is done. And that's the other challenge is that when I try to bring Agile into the strategic planning realm, I'm dealing with all the same baggage that I had to deal with in implementation. But there's this sense of, well, no, that's different. Agile's over there in software, but I'm in strategic planning, so I don't have to pay attention to that. And what we're saying, and you're writing about, is no, not really.
Yes.
We all have to think this way if we're going to thrive in this new environment.
Right.
So, okay. Other connections that we need to draw that we haven't talked about already. I mean, I've talked about sort of the manifesto, some of the manifesto things. We've talked about a collaboration, which is you and I are both really very big on that side. Measurement. I'm trying to think of anything else. We may have gotten through the main.
I got one.
Okay, good.
And I think you brought this up to me, but the lean concept of value streams and value stream mapping.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And those are concepts, as you know, that come from manufacturing. But one of the key concepts is flow, and so our colleague Nanette Brown just wrote a blog very recently. It's called Taking DevSecOps to the Next Level with Value Stream Mapping. So I recommend folks check that out.
We'll make sure that's in the transcript.
Right. One of the key concepts in value streams is flow, which is about reducing the time that it takes to deliver value to a customer, and also removing waste in the value streams, so that you are not doing things that are not, directly contributing to the value, and you increase the efficient delivery of whatever you're doing. So I spoke with Ned about this recently, and we kind of agreed that flow optimization is kind of implicit in Agile's focus on the incremental delivery of value.
Right.
But the application, because again, it comes from the manufacturing world, the application of value streams, that kind of thinking of value stream mapping is relatively new to software. So it's still being explored and honed, but I think it's also very compatible with strategy. Mm-hmm. Value streams allow you to look more broadly at kind of a whole enterprise. There's something called industrial DevSecOps or industrial ops that also tries to do that. But if you're going to broaden the way you look at the flow of the valuable things that you're generating, then strategy should clearly be a part of it. Right. I think that kind of that's kind of an obvious conclusion. So Nanette and I are trying to do some work with a client specifically on introducing the value stream concept into a strategic planning exercise that's already well underway. So stay tuned for more on that. Maybe we'll write something about that too.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that sort of comes back to that is that ecosystem viewpoint. Value stream mapping is a very useful technique for understanding the different streams that are contributing to value delivery, and that allows you to do things like bring in what's the customer operation and what are some of the supplier contributions. So it is a very systematic way of viewing those different elements, and when you're looking at strategy, having that frame as a way of saying, well, what about this and what about that come out of the value stream, I think that would work really well. So stay tuned. See what happens when Nanette and Linda start playing on this stuff. Yeah, that'll be great. No, I think we're coming to the idea that strategy, just like Agile in general, is about ongoing delivery of new thinking, right? And it's ongoing delivery of validation of where we're at and pivoting from where we need to, to where we need to be next. But it's that whole mindset shift of big batch, nothing is done till everything is done, to we need to be looking at the environment, looking at what we're doing all the time.
Right.
And that that's my fundamental thing that I really talk to everyone about all the time, and they get tired of it, but it's okay.
Well, one of the things Nanette talks about in her blog is how software is different from manufacturing in that you're talking about a somewhat intangible project intangible product, and also a large discovery component, which of course to me sounds like strategic planning.
Strategy.
Yeah. So that's interesting too.
Excellent. Before we close, you and I both have a strong history of looking at things from the viewpoint of transition and adoption. And so we usually like to give our viewers some ideas about, if they want to learn more about this, what are some of the recommendations you have? Where should I start? And the resources, obviously all the SEI resources, but even in addition to that, what are some of the things that people wanting to learn more about this should be taking a look at?
Yeah, so we've talked about our blogs quite a bit, so all that plugging stands. But I would also recommend the Association for Strategic Planning. There are a lot of resources on that site about foundational material in strategic planning, but also agility is a concept that is taking hold with strategic planners. So there's a lot of material there. There's also a book that I'll suggest. I like it because it's got a lot of practical tools. It's called Strategic Doing: 10 Skills for Agile Leadership by Ed Morrison, and I think there's 4 other authors on that one. The book's from 2019, and it's really focused on both leadership and strategy development, but it gets to some of the topics that we talked about, like collaboration, some of the different roles that that everybody in the organization can play in executing strategy. So, but it's very practical and gives hands-on techniques and things like that. So I would recommend that one, and that's available from your favorite bookshop online,
virtual or otherwise.
Yep.
I do miss visiting bookstores. I have to say that, but we'll get back to it. All right, Linda, I really want to thank you. I always have. It's not quite like when we go out for coffee together, but this is sort of in that same. We don't always get a chance to talk about these things, and I'm really happy that you've been writing about this, because then I don't have to. But this is really, I think this is a direction that some of our customers are already there. A lot of our customers and a lot of, I think, the outside world is just starting to come on to understanding that it's really agile everything if we want to be part of the global economy as it's evolving. And that means that we've got to do our strategic planning the way we do all of our other execution. And so we're here to help them with that, and you're here to help people understand that. So I really appreciate what you've done here. I do want to remind for the nth time, I will say that we will have a transcript of this podcast, and all of the resources that we've spoken about will be linked into that transcript. So all of our viewers don't have to write things down right now. They can wait for the transcript and see what's there. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Linda. And we will talk to you next time.
Thank you very much, Susie. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us. This episode is available where you download podcasts, including SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. It is also available on the SEI website at sei.cmu.edu/podcasts and the SEI's YouTube channel. This copyrighted work is made available through the Software Engineering Institute, a federally funded research and development center sponsored by the U.S. Department of Defense. For more information about the SEI and this work, please visit www.sei.cmu.edu. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at info@sei.cmu.edu. Thank you.